Hey everyone, Dan here. Before we get into it, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe button and keep in mind that these are my own thoughts, opinions, and ideas. These are not meant to be, nor should you take them as investment or trading advice in any way, shape, or form. Do your own due diligence, put in the work for yourself, and make your decisions based on that. Enjoy. Alright folks, here we are after market close on Wednesday, October 25th. We're going to check in on 4 stocks today: NKLA, AVTX, T2, and NVTA. If you're looking for just some of these stocks, check the description below and you'll find timestamps to each of the tickers. Now for each of them, we're going to do a check-in on the chart here on Webull and then also flip over to the Think or Swim platform and check in there as well. We're going to try to do it relatively quickly. Okay, so kicking things off with NKLA. So NKLA settled here right at $1. We see it's still caught under this downtrend resistance, but trying to base at the moment over this 96.6 that we have on the chart. If we hide these for a moment and pull in our EMAs, we do see it brushing up against the 8 EMA, which would be its first level of resistance, being that it's tight into there. And that the first level of resistance as far as levels that we have would be this 110 after it gets past this 105. So 105, then then the 8 EMA, and then if it's still there, the 110. Somewhere in the mix there, depending on if it continues to push at all and where it is on this chart, it's going to hit the downtrend resistance as well. So several levels of resistance here, not just the ones that we have on the chart, but also the EMAs. So just something to keep in mind and be aware of, that if it does start to push, unless it really explodes through that downtrend resistance, which could happen, obviously earnings are coming up, so who knows, that could be a big catalyst. But unless it really explodes through there, it does look to me like there's a lot of stickiness upward through the levels as well as the EMAs. Now, on the Think or Swim side of things, we had this 180 to 200 EMA cloud situated way up here, closer to 2. So that's not really playing a factor at the moment. And the price action is kind of just situated itself down here toward the lower bound of the channel. It was triggering on the TTM squeeze indicator, and that was several days into firing. It did have a bit of a move downward. I don't know if that's the entire move, if it's going to retrigger and refire again as it heads into earnings. So that would be kind of interesting to see. I do often see sort of a trigger heading into earnings, and then whatever the reaction is to earnings, sometimes if it's big enough, that will set off the firing mechanism. So interesting to see there. It does look like, bearish momentum is sort of stagnant at the moment, so potentially an opportunity for it to peel back, but we'll just have to kind of wait and see. But it could be interesting if it is able to try to base right around this dollar level, even if it sort of squeezes itself for several days as we head into earnings. If it moves sideways, it would kind of bump into this right around that time. So it could get quite interesting in the coming days. AVTX. So this puppy, let me zoom in here so we don't have to stare at 1,000 levels on the chart. But basically the gist is we had this wedge, and it wedged out and it caught this big move down, minus 12% on this day, and then has continued to lose price ever since. Now it's getting back into this gap that we have. You see this gap was nearly filled back here, right, on the wick of this candle. But what we see here is it won't fill until about 919, and this one stretched down again on the wick to 950. So, is it coming down chasing that gap fill? I don't know, but it dipped into there today and then pushed back out. So sometimes if gaps sort of are filled enough, if you will, that's imprecise language, but if sort of this would suffice and it doesn't really need to come down for gap purposes, if you will, sometimes they'll start to treat that previous gap level as support. So I guess, if you are looking for a potential upside, that could be it. But, I don't know if that's going to come in and rescue it at the moment. Obviously, it's under a lot of stress and duress as far as the trend at the moment. And a relatively fresh bearish crossover with the 8 crossing below the 21 here. just a few days ago. And, because of the sort of herky-jerky price action here, the 34 is situated way above. So we didn't see sort of a kind of standard situation where all three EMAs are pretty tight in, and then the bearish crossovers began. It's sort of this odd setup where the 34 is way up here, again, because of this previous huge, huge change in price. It still is stuck way up there, and we did see the 8 and the 21 bunching up and then crossing over recently. So that's obviously not helping it. Who knows, maybe that 10-cent level, obviously that's where bulls stepped in today, so maybe that will provide some sort of a psychological level. I don't know, but it was at least a nice wick up versus the strong wick downs that we saw here, and then just the full red candle bodies leading up to it. So, not looking super at the moment, but obviously this one has explosive tendencies, and so it's a little bit hard to get stuck too concretely in one direction or the other. AVTX, we'll see what it looks like on here. So poor AVTX is situated all the way down here. That lower bound of the channel is way down here somewhere, and to the upside it's all the way up to 20. So again, if it wants to move strongly in either direction, there's nothing encumbering it from doing so, but just keep in mind that strong motion could come in either direction, so you don't necessarily want to get caught off guard. Also of interest, lengthy trigger phase here on the TTM squeeze indicator, and just today putting in the first fire candle. Now what does that mean? Again, we saw a decent wick up on the candle. We see that it came down and basically had a near miss off of this low to mid range of the channel. So is it going to be able to catch support and retest the mid range of the channel right now, situated at about 13? I don't know, but interesting that it had a pretty lengthy, that's a pretty long trigger period as it was pinned to the mid-range of the channel, and now setting off the first fire today. How that takes shape in the coming days could be quite interesting. T2. So T2, really, really rocky ride on this one, but if we, zoom out a little bit here, we had this nearest in downtrend resistance. Obviously it had several levels of downtrend resistance, and now it's trying to break through that and get some distance. Now, I would have said this last time, but it's been a while, so the most important thing for T2 at the moment is to get some distance away from this downtrend resistance, because if it doesn't get distance, even if that's sideways distance, not necessarily just like distance like this, right? Even if it's kind of like this, it will give it an opportunity to not do the saddest of all things, which is break downtrend resistance, and then a few days later just sort of creep back down and start following this downtrend resistance down outside of it. So essentially treating it as downtrend support, and essentially having the same outcome of dwindling price, but just being situated on the other side of the trend line. Okay, so in an effort to avoid that, what I would want to see if I'm a T2 bull is a distinct moving through these levels here, 706, 886, to get itself some distance and to not have any strong motions back down toward this downtrend resistance. Now, if we pop these off for a moment, see where our EMAs are situated. So it still has plenty of room to stretch, especially percentage-wise. It was up 35 cents today, and that was over 6%. So it could stretch up almost $2 more, right? $7.91 is the 8 EMA. So aside from the levels that we have on the chart, that wouldn't be coming into play until $7.91. So that there's plenty of room there if it's able to get some stability and push through this 706, which even that's like there's a lot of room in here because it's not spent a lot of time in this range, and so there's not a lot of price action to really pull from. So where the sort of bulkheads are, where those walls are, we don't really know yet, and so we have these sort of like pretty spread out channel or support and resistance levels. And so can it move through there relatively quickly? Maybe. Certainly it has a history of really, really explosive potential. So we'll see if that plays out or not. Now where it's situated in the channel is outside of the channels and just entering in. So again, this could be an interesting setup. Obviously, it's under really strong bearish momentum, right? You see bearish trend there. You see bearish momentum still showing on the histogram is picking up, even though we have a couple of days of slight motion upward. But it is working into the channel. Now, if it doesn't immediately shrug off of this cloud as resistance, that would be an indication that the bears the momentum is still really, really strong. If it is able to work itself into the cloud, the best potential opportunity for T2 at the moment would be for it to try to test the mid-range of the channel, that bright blue line. Now that changes every time a candle gets put in. So right now it's 1444. It probably won't be at 1444 if and when it gets there. But, if I were a T2 bull, that's the motion that I'd be looking for. Get into this cloud. Don't just immediately shrug off the cloud and get pushed back down. But it has been outside of the channel, and what we look for is at some point for it to come back into the channel and test the mid-range. It may come into the channel and not be able to get the muster to challenge the mid-range. That's when we know that the bears or whomever still have a really strong grip on it. So that's sort of the question at the moment. Can it muster the strength to test the mid-range? And if not, that would indicate to me the bears still have the grip on this one, and the bulls can't really put up a fight just yet. NVTA. So NVTA really down here in no man's land, but good call out on the descending wedge you see, or descending triangle. Here you have this downtrend resistance that was building toward this attempt, or that was sort of on a collision course with this attempt to build a floor on NVTA, and that's the descending triangle. And we look for it to get in, compressed price action within this smaller and smaller space and then sort of explode one way or the other. Usually in a setup like this, we look for it to push hard to the downside. If you have an ascending triangle, sometimes they call it a flat top, then we look for the opposite action to push strongly through the upside. But we saw that play out here, this day when it really moved down over 8.5%, and then another 4%, and then +2, and then minus over 5. So obviously the red days are winning every single time it's coming up after this break recently. So, I'll leave that on there for now, but it's going to need to break this downtrend resistance if there's going to be any hope for a reversal here. That said, it hasn't really gotten shoved down so much that it's really, really losing a lot of distance from the 8 EMA. So if we were able to build a little bit of a curl at the bottom, a little bit of a rounded bottom, and be able to scoop itself up a little bit, it could grab support of that 8 EMA, and that may help give it the lift that it needs to try to break through this downtrend resistance, and who knows, maybe even this previous support now turned resistance at 60. So it still is sort of in proximity to that if it's able to muster some motion, but we don't see any sort of evidence of that at the moment. So we'll see if anything changes in the days ahead. Now over here, NVTA, let's see what we got going here. This tells the story, right? Just pinned between the mid-range and the lower bound of the channel for many, many, many days and weeks. We do see lengthy trigger, and today just putting in the first fire candle on today's candle. So it's pushed down there toward the lower bound of the channel, putting in its first fire. Does that mean that it's gearing up for a strong move? RSI is oversold. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. RSI was oversold back here, and that gave you a brief relief, and then it just lost more price. So I'll just repeat this to have said it. Just because something is oversold doesn't mean that that bulls have to step in to buy it, and just because something is overbought doesn't mean that people have to start selling it. It can spend a lot of time in both of those ranges. But I am interested to see if anything comes of this trigger and fire. We had a trigger and fire back here, and that led to a pretty lengthy sell-off. That's sort of still taking place. So is this going to be an extension of that? Is this going to be an opportunity for it to come back and at least, test the mid-range of the channel? If not, try to reverse trend? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see what comes of that trigger and fire on the TTM squeeze indicator. All right, folks, I hope that you had a happy hump day and that you finish out the week strong in the days ahead. And as always, I appreciate you watching, and I will see you in the next video.